As some of you know, Last Ditch Effort is considered to be one of the greatest abilities in Splatoon 3. But just because it's great doesn't mean that it's viable on every weapon. A common question that I get asked is, Chase, is Last Ditch Effort useful for dualies? I'll cover the answer to that question and more in just a second, but first, if you enjoy the video and want to see more like it, consider giving the video a like and subscribing. We're getting really close to 25,000 subscribers, so any support is greatly appreciated. Before getting into the main topic, I think it's important to make sure that everyone watching understands just how exactly Last Ditch Effort works, because there's a lot of things that the game doesn't tell you. If you're already an expert on how LDE works in this game, just skip to this timestamp. So when you look at the in-game description for LDE, this is all it tells you. Boosts ink recovery rate and weapon ink efficiency for the last 30 seconds of battle. I mean, okay, yeah, that's not wrong. The ability does do that, but the perks go so much deeper than what the description tells you. What the game doesn't tell you is that if you aren't playing Turf War, Last Ditch Effort can actually kick in way before the last 30 seconds of a match. It's actually tied to the enemy team's objective counter. As soon as the opponents push their objective counter past 50, Last Ditch Effort will actually start to kick in already, but in small amounts. To be more specific, if the enemy pushes their objective count to 50 on the dot, you'll get 1 extra ability point of Ink Saver Main, Ink Saver Sub, and Ink Recovery up. If they push it to 49, you'll get 2 ability points. 48, 3 ability points. It'll go like this all the way up until the enemy pushes their objective counter to 30, where Last Ditch Effort's full effect will kick in. 24 ability points for all the ink-related gear perks. In other words, once the full effect has kicked in, you're getting about 2 mains and 2 subs worth of Ink Saver Main, Ink Saver Sub, and Ink Recovery, all at the cost of just 1 main ability slot. And once it's activated, it doesn't go away for the rest of the game. So for example, let's say your opponent gets a super early lead on tower control and push it all the way to 20 in the first minute of the game. Well, Last Ditch Effort is going to be in full effect the remaining 4 minutes. Oh, and did I mention that Last Ditch Effort remains active during overtime as well? That should be kind of obvious, but I figured I should mention it. When it comes to the different game modes, it's worth noting that Last Ditch Effort is by far the most useful on Splat zones. The reason for this is because the likelihood of your opponents getting their zone counter below 50 is pretty high, at least compared to all the other modes. However, that's not to say that LDE can't be good in the other modes as well. I'd say it can definitely have use cases in both Rainmaker and Tower Control, but for those modes, I think it's more map dependent. Certain maps are a lot easier to push the Rainmaker or Tower on than others, like Scorch Gorge or Eeltail Alley for example. Now Clan Blitz is probably the mode that LDE has the least amount of uses in, and the reason for that is that it's kind of the opposite of Splat zones. The odds of people KOing or even getting their objective counter below 50 is a lot less frequent, and when it does happen, it tends to be towards the end of the match. Do realize that I'm not necessarily saying that LDE is bad in Clan Blitz, but I do think it's the least useful mode for it, and you're better off running Comeback instead. Oh, and if you're someone who's into Turf War, LDE is good for it, even with the lack of extra perks that it gets from the ranked modes. Being able to output extra paint and sub-weapons in the last 30 seconds of Turf War is extremely vital, since, you know, only the last 30 seconds matter in that mode. Okay, now that we all understand the ins and outs of Last Ditch Effort, let's get into the main purpose of this video. Is Last Ditch Effort useful for dualies? What I'm going to do is go over each dualie individually, and give a quick summary for each one as to why I do or don't think LDE is effective for it. Sound good? Let's do it. Splat Dualies. Yes, I'd say LDE is quite good on these, for any mode. Even after buffs that this weapon has received in the past, its ink consumption is still pretty mediocre in my opinion. Plus, running LDE can help you output more suction bombs and be able to actually fight after throwing one, which it struggles to do normally. For Splat zones, I'd argue that you should definitely run Last Ditch Effort on these. For the other modes, you can also run LDE, or go with Comeback if you're okay with losing out on some of the ink perks in exchange for more movement perks. Just remember though, Comeback goes away after 20 seconds, whereas Last Ditch Effort will stay active for the remainder of the match. Dapple Dualies. LDE is definitely not necessary on this weapon. Its ink consumption is already pretty good, and it doesn't really struggle with torpedo or beacon output. However, I personally do use last ditch effort on the Dapple Dualies Nouveau, for splat zones only. My reasoning is that it just makes torpedo spamming a lot easier, and as I mentioned earlier, the odds of LDE activating in this mode are relatively high. But again, as I said, definitely not necessary at all for this weapon, just something that I like to run personally. Dualie Squelchers. Most people opt to run Comeback on this weapon since it works well with its playstyle, but a fair share of people run LDE as well. This weapon is notorious for having awful ink consumption, since its dodge rolls take up a whopping 8% of your ink tank. And for the vanilla Dualie Squelchers, Splat Bomb takes up 70% of your ink tank. If you don't have any ink management perks, you pretty much can't use Splat Bomb at all in fights. To be honest, even with last ditch effort fully activated, you still might struggle to use your bomb in fights, and that might play into why some players opt to run Comeback instead. They just don't even bother with trying to make the bomb more useful. I personally do run last ditch effort whenever I use this weapon, but I'd say this is one you should try to feel out for yourself. Glooga Dualies. Just like the Dapple Dualies, I don't think LDE is necessary on this weapon at all, but on splat zones, it can be pretty handy. You might find it weird to run LDE on a weapon that doesn't have a bomb, but all the efficiency perks from it can really help out with the splash wall. You usually can't shoot for very long after throwing the wall and dodge rolling, but with LDE active, it feels like you can shoot forever. Tetra Dualies. These are the worst dualies for last ditch effort. Don't run it. Don't get me wrong, it can certainly help, but LDE really doesn't help this weapon serve its role at all. I'd argue that even opening Gambit is better on this thing. Tetras aren't a weapon that's going to be sitting around spamming its sub-weapon. It's meant to go in, be a distraction, and die. Plus, both Autobomb and Sprinkler aren't really sub-weapons that you should be spamming anyways. You're better off just running more quick respawn to keep you more present in the match. Well, that's all the dualies. Overall, I'd say last ditch effort is useful on them, but mainly for splat zones. You can use it in the other modes too, but I personally think Comeback would suit dualies a little better for those. But yeah, let me know what you all think down below. Do you think LDE is good for dualies? Why or why not? And remember, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and consider subscribing. That's gonna be it for me. I'll see you all next time.